Hello, friends. I found a phenomenal Skinwalker. He is a magician. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. I always read stories about Skinwalkers. Now I've killed one. I remember back when I was a high school kid reading creepypasta stories on the internet. The Skinwalker ones always stuck out to me. You know, the ones where the people are in some remote location, then one of them disappears for a bit and comes back different. Then starts strange scream and they run away, blah blah blah. They're all similar, but I found the idea so interesting. Creepy goat beasts that pretend to be human? Sign me up. My only problem with the stories is how helpless the people always were. Sometimes the people would fire a shot and all it would do is slow the creature down. Fair. But first, they would take too long to figure out something is up. Or they would just try to run and hide. That never worked out. I'll admit, Skinwalkers are damn scary. I know now from experience. But I also know the only way to beat one is to fight. I do have something to admit. I was a serious addict at the time. Not to one particular thing, I just didn't want to be in my own skin. I wouldn't say I was homeless. More like a nomad. I had some money in the bank and a car, but not much else. Well, except for the copious amounts of drugs. I have 2 years sober now. But this story is from 5 years ago. Even after I bought a scary monster, I didn't get clean. The scariest monsters are the ones inside of us. But Skinwalkers are pretty scary too. Here's my recount, to the best of my memory. It was raining in Detroit. I had been driving back from Canada, after getting some exquisite MXC. Cheap and well made, thanks to Canada. I figured since it was pouring, and getting dark, I'd find an old abandoned house to sleep in. I drove down a few of the roads on the outskirts of the city, dilapidated houses on both sides of me. Many of them had water pouring through their broken windows. Some of them were partially caved in, wear and neglect taking their toll. One was on fire? Detroit really had become a shithole. My best guess was the water had gotten into some electrics. I heard sirens in the distance. Good sign though, since that meant electricity was flowing down the block. I drove a bit more until I saw a house that fit my 3 criteria. It wasn't leaking, it wasn't occupied, and it wasn't on fire. It was a pretty nice house. 1 floor, small but comfortable, redwood paneling on the outside. White bordered windows, even a stone chimney. I went around back through the overgrown yard, picked the miraculously unbroken door, and got out of the rain. I checked the place out and it was like I had walked into heaven. The bedroom had a mattress, the sink wasn't gross and had running water, and there was an electric stove that worked. Today was my lucky day. I unpacked some of my things, threw my sleeping bag on the mattress, and set some water to boil while charging my laptop. See, I told you I wasn't homeless. I liked a bit of comfort in my life. I had my cooler with milk and butter too, so my mac and cheese were damn delicious. And finally, I had the time to get high. It should be noted, I've never hallucinated. Even after taking tons of acid or shrooms, I only had color effects and swirling. Distortion but not a projection. So imagine my confusion when, sitting in the warm light I had on in a sturdy chair, high out of my mind, I heard a screaming sound outside. I wasn't scared, but since when were the scary goats in Detroit? Weird. But I was occupied. So I got back to watching YouTube on my phone. Come morning, I woke up to find it was still raining. Great. I was honestly enjoying my stay in a somewhat furnished house, so I pulled out my laptop and got to some browsing. Of course, I helped myself to ingest a bit more MXC, plus a bowl or two, and I was quite content. Then I heard a knock on the door. No. Weed always made me paranoid, and while it was slightly negated by the MXC, being in a house I had technically broken into putting me on edge. I hoped to God it wasn't the police, but I answered the door nonetheless. There stood a man, soaking wet, clearly high. I thought, hey, unless this guy shanks me, we could be best buddies. He wasn't intimidating, a bit shorter than me and scrawny, with unmatched shoes a size too big and uncut scraggly hair. Hey boss, help a guy get out of the cold and rain for a bit? I said sure, and we exchanged some pleasantries as he came in. I don't think he was in any state of mind to determine that the house had clearly been abandoned, but even if he was, he didn't say anything. He just sat down in a chair and rode whatever wave he was on. I continued my own browsing, taking a bit more MXC out of sight from him than offering him to smoke. He happily obliged. I figured another druggie wouldn't care to steal some guy's weed, but a white powder, even I'd steal that if I saw it. A few hours passed and the rain let up. He thanked me, got up, and left. Another human interaction with no trouble, a win in my book. Since it was around 5, I made myself a cup of ramen and continued on with my never-ending journey of dousing my self-loathing with chemicals. I threw down a bottle of cheaply acquired Robitussin to add to my high and waited for it to hit. Once the hour of waiting was up, I felt the new sensations flowing through my veins and lay down to get through a bit of nausea. As I was lying there, something passed through my peripheral vision outside. It almost looked like a goat. I wasn't going to be getting up unless the bed under me was on fire, so I stopped caring. Then came the scream again. My mind, neurons now shooting quickly in succession to recognize any pattern, went right to the stories of Skinwalkers. I vividly remembered everything, and a part of me, a small part, wished that I was dealing with one. I fantasized about being in the woods, seeing a friend come back as something wrong. I went through the possibilities, how I would handle it. Plans and plans ran through my brain. Setting wild booby traps, shooting it with a machine gun, and many more I don't remember. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next day I felt like absolute garbage. My stomach couldn't handle an entire bottle of cough syrup like it used to. Now I know that I was getting stomach ulcers. But I was still in the midst of my addiction then, so I didn't really care. I drank some milk and took an Alka-Seltzer, popped a few Xanax, and passed out for the next 16 hours. I woke up to loud knocking on the door. I tumbled out of the bed, headed to the door, then noted, it's pitch black outside, raining again, and I don't actually live here. Who could that be? I got to the door and tried looking through the peephole, but couldn't see a thing. Then I heard the knocking again. Loud and fast, like it was an emergency. I popped back to where my bag was, grabbed my admittedly crummy old gun, and pocketed it. Then I opened the door. There stood the man from the other day, drenched again, looking down at the ground. I asked him if he was okay. And he slowly turned his head up. He locked eyes with me and a shiver went down my spine. Something was different. Hey boss, help a guy get out of the cold and rain for a bit? He said as he did the first time, but the slur of his words was gone and his voice had this strange nasal sound to it. Against my better judgment, I let him in. He walked rigidly now. Much less talkative, he sat down where I offered and just stared at me. Like I was something novel. Like I was something different. I packed and lit up a bowl since he was seriously making me uncomfortable. Then I offered it to him. He stared at me like I had two heads, then took it and inhaled, mimicking me. That was a bad idea. I quickly noticed a few things. He was now coughing so hard it looked like his face was about to come loose. Then it did. Like a kid wearing a Halloween mask that slid to one side. His pupils turned into rectangles. And his hands had ripped open, peeling back like a banana peel, revealing claws. I had just gotten a Skinwalker high. I stared at him, at it, dumbfounded for a second, before the primal part of me took over. I don't know how I pulled it off, but my brain fired the emergency switch, ran to the bedroom, grabbed my bag with everything in it, crushed up an Adderall, snorted it, refocused, ran back to the entry, saw the boatman, Skinwalker, who was now scary and screaming. Bony protrusions had cracked up through his spine. His clothes had almost tripped entirely off, the beast's chest now a hulking mass of muscle pulsating with anger, growing larger by the second. I ran past and booked it to my car. I threw my shit in the car, and my brain was on ultra speed. Would driving work? No, those things always catch up in the stories. Gun? Not my piece of shit. Fire? The fire would work. I grabbed my spare can of gas from my car, booked it back, and hoped to God that thing hadn't regained its senses. When I entered the door, I realized it had, and it was pissed. The now hooved monstrosity charged right at me, swiping with its claws. It grazed my side, sending searing pain through my synapses. I barely managed to hold on to the can of gas, and tumbled into the bedroom, directly onto the bed. I was apparently bleeding more than the pain was telling me because I slipped a bit in a puddle of my own blood trying to flee to the opposite side of the bed. Away from the monster now barreling through the doorway. I flipped the mattress with my sleeping bag up, and the thing started shredding it. It was making unholy screams now like an elephant was giving birth to a goat that was being mauled by a lion. I managed to pour the gas onto the mattress with one hand, bracing the mattress between myself and the certain death right behind it. The goat beast didn't seem to care, getting covered in gasoline, mattress material, and sleeping bag foam. I let back on the mattress a little, just enough for it to push forward hard. Then I pushed back harder. So hard I broke my wrist. So hard I sprained both ankles. It didn't expect the life and death Hulk strength and flinched for only a second, but I used that second of fear and drug-induced time dilation to smash through the window behind me. Without even thinking, I flicked open my lighter and threw it in the window. Within a second the room was up in flames. After I ran to the curb, I looked back inside. What I saw in the window was my proudest moment. The monster was engulfed in flames. Not only had the gasoline caught, but the foam and other material had stuck to it, and was rapidly searing off skin and muscle. The thing was screaming. It was dying. It was the most metal thing I had ever seen. I took a sigh of relief, then noticed a cool feeling on my leg. I looked down to find an absurd pool of blood under me. The pain hit. I passed out. I woke up in the hospital. Apparently firefighters had found me. I told the police a semi-lie about being a squatter and having someone come at me with a knife, and when I was out they must have started the fire. I was eventually discharged, found my way back to the house and got in my car. Then I got the hell out of Detroit. So that's how I killed a Skinwalker. Or a goat man. Whatever you want to call that thing. Yeah, I almost died. But I didn't. Is there a lesson from this? Yes, and here it is because I like to share my opinions. Monsters have to hide in the dark because they're afraid of us. Maybe not individually, but they must have seen what we're able to accomplish as a group. We will turn land bare for resources, create weapons that could annihilate all life, and shoot ourselves in metal tubes into space. We're smart and vicious, and no matter how good any beast gets at murder, humans have mastered the art. I don't know how to end this triumphant speech, so I am just going to stop writing now. Okay now. Alright, maybe one more sentence. Wait, I almost forgot the classic.